India's claim to Kashmir is based on both modern and more ancient history. Pakistan's claim to Kashmir is based on both modern and medieval history. Of course, the Kashmiri's own arguments routinely ignored. So you go back anciently. Anciently, this was a center of Buddhism and especially of the Vedic traditions. The Brahmins would come here, they would study in the tradition of what we call today Hinduism. So it was a very, very strong Hindu center for centuries. Okay, and this is important stuff because India, and there's no real historical precedent for the modern country of India. India is a mishmash of many countries and peoples and languages and cultures and historical traditions and religious strains and whatnot, all mashed together today and ruled by New Delhi. The one thing that arguably joins them together, and of course this would be contested, is Hinduism, is that Vedic tradition. That's the one thing that maybe ostensibly provides a base for nationhood. And so being able to join Kashmir to the Hindu world of antiquity, that's an important part of the Indian historical claim to Kashmir. And of course, the Indian government doesn't bring this up as its official reason for its occupation of Kashmir. That official reasoning is much more technical and based on legalities, but psychologically, this has to be considered the foundation of India's historical claim to Kashmir. Now, around 1300, the Muslims show up. These are Sufi saints, these are Muslim missionaries. They have great success in this valley. And within a couple hundred years, a majority of Kashmiris are Muslim. Okay? And for about 500 years, Muslim rulers rule this valley, some local, some ruling from the outside. That's the backbone of Pakistan's historical claim. The fact of a large Muslim majority in the population plus 500 years of Muslim rule. And then there's the Kashmiri claim, or the Kashmiri arguments, too often lost in the bigger story of India versus Pakistan. You know, so many cases like this around the world. Local people being used as pawns, their history ignored because there's a bigger game going on. Two much bigger powers, competing in some other game. But anyway, Kashmir, for most of Kashmir's history, it's a history of independence. For most of it is a history of either out and out independence or really being ruled over, usually very nominally, by someone else. But that's the vast majority of Kashmir's history. A history of independence, a history of being its own country. More recently, Kashmir fell under the Mughals for a while, and the Pathans out of Afghanistan ruled here for a while. The Sikhs temporarily came and took it under Ranjit Singh, and then it was eventually ceded to the British East India Company, who placed Gulab Singh in charge as Maharaja of a state of which Kashmir was only a small part. It's called Kashmir and Jammu. And ultimately, this would become just one of hundreds of princely states within the greater British Raj system. And this is important because the princely state of Kashmir and Jammu is now being ruled by a Hindu Maharaja. And this is the way it is for 100 years, all the way up to 1947 and independence of Pakistan and India. And at that point, that's where the current trouble really begins, right? What is Kashmir supposed to do? You've got this Muslim majority state, and you have to choose India or Pakistan. You've got this Hindu ruler, not to mention that the princely state itself seems divided on the issue. No one's going around conducting official polls, but it seems like in the far western regions and the northern areas, the tilt seems to be towards joining Pakistan. In Ladakh and in Jammu, the tilt seems heavily to be toward India. And then in Kashmir itself, well, no one knows. Both sides are afraid of letting the Kashmiris decide. India's afraid Kashmiris will go Pakistan. The Pakistanis are afraid the Kashmiris will go India. And the truth is, they might have chosen that most forbidden choice, and that is independence. And while the Maharaja was dilly-dallying, and Hari Singh was his name, fighters poured in from Pakistan, with some significant local help too, but fighters poured in from Pakistan to ensure that Kashmir will be part of Pakistani territory. Pakistan, after all, had theoretically been created as a homeland for South Asia's Muslims. Kashmir is vast majority Muslim. Anyway, these guys pour in. It's ironic that many of these fighters were Pathan tribesmen. So these are descendants of the very same people who had poured in and conquered and occupied Kashmir in the past. I have to say, too, that this Pakistani invasion may have been at least partly sparked by the killing of Muslims, the massacre of Muslims by Sikhs and even Hari Singh's own forces, the Maharaja's own army, in and around Jammu. But in any case, the incursion spooked Hari Singh. And so who does he turn to for help? He knows his own forces are going to, they're outnumbered, they're outgunned, they're going to lose. And he's afraid he's going to lose everything. So he turns to India for help, of course. And what do the Indians say? Well, they say, yeah, we'll help you as long as you accede to India. You join Kashmir and Jammu to India. Of course, he has no choice. He says yes. Indian forces are airlifted right into this valley, into the Srinagar Valley. And, the Indo-Pakistani War of 1947 is on. But there was an important proviso, critical proviso, to the Instrument of Accession, which essentially stated, and this is the government of India officially stating that, look, no single person can decide the political fate of the Kashmiri people, not even the Maharaja, just one guy. And so after Pakistan is pushed out, we will hold a plebiscite in Kashmir and let the Kashmiri people decide their political future. Okay, so that was the promise, a plebiscite, a vote. That was the promise. It was also probably a bald-faced lie. For a year, the Azad army, made up mostly of Pathans and some locals, made war upon other locals and the Indian army. About halfway through, the Pakistani military got directly involved as well. Didn't matter though. After about a year of fighting, Pakistanis had been pushed back significantly. Most of Kashmir was in Indian hands, and in January of 1949, a ceasefire was put into effect. Now, the UN proposed a plan to resolve this whole thing. And their plan involved a step-by-step withdrawal plus a plebiscite. And this was all fine and dandy with India, who accepted it because it would have required Pakistan to withdraw first. Pakistanis, of course, reject it, afraid that if they withdraw their forces, the Indians won't withdraw their forces. So that's sort of what's going on. Meanwhile, the Kashmiris, the people who actually live here, they don't really have a say. Well, the Kashmiris never got their plebiscite. They never got their vote. That promise, was never fulfilled. And you can place blame on the government of India and the government of Pakistan. India probably more so, simply considering the fact that most of Kashmir has been in Indian hands since the 1947-48 war, and there's been no plebiscite. So there you go. The founder of Pakistan, though, Jinnah, he had the opportunity to get the Kashmiris this plebiscite in exchange for some other concessions, but he rejected it. Why did he do it? Because he was afraid the Kashmiris would vote wrong. Okay, so it's a tragedy. In the years following, several other efforts were made at seeing a plebiscite through, but they all fell through. They were all failures. In 1965, India and Pakistan squared off again. Thousands died. Both sides claimed victory. Of course, we're talking about India and Pakistan when we talk about sides. The Kashmiri side, it doesn't seem to matter so much. In 1999, India and Pakistan would square off again in the high mountain terrain just a few hours' drive from here. Today, a slice of Kashmir is still held by Pakistan. They call it Azad Kashmir, Free Kashmir, while the rest is held by India, including the Srinagar Valley, critically. According to recent polls, several, and according to my own conversations with Kashmiris, the vast majority of Kashmiris favor independence. And as often happens in the wake of military occupation, a segment of the local population has become militarized and radicalized. And so there's an armed insurgency that Indian security forces have to deal with on a regular basis, sometimes armed just with rocks, but armed. Meanwhile, other Kashmiris, I talked to several, express hopelessness. It reminds me of the Tibetan cause a little bit. They express hopelessness, despair. They know a vote is never coming. And they know that India is going nowhere.